Okay, well, I am excited to welcome you all to our Fall 2021 Story Slam. We're happy to be doing this again in person for the first time now since fall of 2020, or did we get one? I can't remember.
We got it right under the.
All right, so about a year and a half. We did one or two of them online, and we're also broadcasting this one on Zoom for people who can't be here, but we're happy to be able to do this in person. This is one of our more festive events in the narrative medicine program, and we have our fearless leader of the narrative medicine program, Director Mike Vitez, a self-described story machine. We also have our assistant director in the audience here, Dr. Rosenberg. And so on behalf of the narrative medicine program and the medical school, I welcome you all. Thank you for attending. I'm looking forward to hearing these stories, and I will turn it over to Mike.
Hello, everybody. Thank you guys for coming. Thank you, Doug. Thank you, Naomi. I should begin, I guess, with the thank yous. Thank you on behalf to my two narrative medicine colleagues, Dr. Rosenberg and Dr. Reifler. Thank you up there, Joanne, for all your help. Thank you, Daryl, for yours tonight, making this happen. Thank you, first of all. This is our 9th Story Slam, our first post-pandemic. I welcome, we're doing a hybrid tonight, in person and at home. So you people at home are missing out on this great City View pizza. Sorry. I promise when the pandemic is over, we'll get back to our Tierra Colombiana buffet, which is wonderful, and one of our signature dish. So I just also want to thank the storytellers. Our theme tonight is courage, and it certainly takes courage to stand up here and share these stories with all of you out there and at home. I want to thank the audience here, the audience out in Zoom land and around Temple. You guys have been so supportive of our work. I feel like we've gotten a tremendous reception in the 5 years that I've been running this narrative medicine program, and I want to thank you for your support. You know me, I believe that our brains are wired for stories, and if you want to reach somebody and stir somebody, you do it by telling a story. And I also believe that people here at Temple see and do and feel extraordinary things, especially during a pandemic, and it's really important to stop, to pause, to take a moment to share and appreciate those stories, because it reminds us, it bonds us together, it reminds us of our common purpose and experiences, and it reminds us of our common humanity. And I am so glad all you people out there in Zoom land are here, but in my experience, there's nothing like being in the room when people show their vulnerabilities, share their stories, the things they've experienced and felt. So thank you all. We have 12 people sharing stories tonight. Dr. Kramer is a late addition. Thank you, Dr. Kramer. She's in the program. The rules are very simple. Everybody gets 5 minutes to tell a story. There's a little clock here. Dr. Reitler's a timekeeper. We won't give you a hook if you go over, but we don't want you to go over by too much. The beauty is that you have to be concise. So the clock is your friend. The other thing I want to say is that at the end of the night, the audience will choose the winner. The audience on Zoom Daryl will send out a poll, and you'll get to vote. I'll explain that at the end. An audience here will also vote, and your accounting firm of Reifler, Rosenberg, and Vitez and Company will tabulate the votes and will announce the winners. And as is become a tradition, the Story Slam has spread to all the other medical schools in the city, and we have a citywide Story Slam, and our top winners here are invited to participate in that, which I hope will be in spring at the College of Physicians. So without further ado, let's get started. I want to, our first storyteller is Jean Lee, And Jean is a veteran, which is why I asked her to go first, and has been very supportive of our Story Slam and our narrative medicine program. And so welcome Jean, who's going to take it away. Step right up. All right. So right on that, we have to get on that little X right there.
I have to get on the
and
X.
if you can see yourself right in there. There
I
you
can
go.
see myself in there. Okay. Hi there. Hello, I'm Jean Lee. I'm a nephrologist at Temple, and I'm also the medical director at Dialysis Clinic, Inc., Philadelphia, formerly MCP, which has served its neighbors in North Philadelphia for 40 years and is the last nonprofit outpatient dialysis unit in the city of Philadelphia. 2020 was a terrible year for us. We lost 22 of our patients to COVID. Many more patients and staff were sickened. I wrote about the courage of the DCI family last year in the Narrative Medicine newsletter and how they overcame fear to care for each other, hoping for better times. This is a story about the forms that hope takes and how my unit created it. When the vaccines came out in December 2020, I thought that it would be distributed first to places like us in North Philadelphia, since we were hit so hard. We applied to be a vaccine distributor and were rejected, although we were successfully vaccinating people for 40 years. Then Tony Reed, the chief medical officer at Temple, told me that the patients could get their shots at Temple and Jean's. They were even calling patients to schedule shots. So I provided a patient list to Temple. But now for the hard part. Before the vaccine rollout, we took a poll in the unit. Only 40% of the patients said they would get the vaccine. They were scared, they were getting bad information, and they were profoundly distrustful of the system. But they did trust us, and that made all the difference. They knew that we cared and that we were in this together. Early in the pandemic, we decided to call the patients the day before their dialysis appointment to screen for COVID symptoms. Our unit dietitians, Katie and Lauren, threw themselves into this with enthusiasm. After identifying sick patients, Katie would guide them to appropriate care. On several occasions, she coaxed sick, scared patients into going to the hospital, and I believe she saved their lives. So once the vaccine was available, Katie appointed herself as the vaccine navigator. She scheduled appointments at Temple for our patients and kept track of who went. As the number of vaccinated patients grew, Lainey, our charge nurse, suggested that we create an Excel spreadsheet tracking progress by shift so the staff could focus on encouraging the unvaccinated patients to get their shots. As the number of vaccinations rose, the number of COVID cases declined. Finally, in April, our unit obtained vaccine from the CDC, and we were able to vaccinate our own patients. But by that time, thanks to Temple and to the diligence of our staff, 72% of the patients already had their first shot, and 60% were fully vaccinated. And as of today, over 92% of our patients are fully vaccinated. This is in North Philadelphia, where the vaccination rate is about 40 to 50%. We have had some breakthrough cases, but everyone has recovered. This had markedly improved vaccine acceptance. About a week ago, Marie, the nurse manager, convinced 2 holdouts to get vaccinated. And as for Katie, our dietitian, she had postponed her wedding at the beginning of the pandemic, and she cried. She was married in the fall of 2020 in a small ceremony, but was able to go on her honeymoon in the spring of 2021. The vaccinated patients and staff have gone on vacation. They visited family and friends and are socializing cautiously in the waiting room. And we are cautiously hopeful, but I still think of the dead. So thank you for listening. And again, I'm really happy to be here in this room in person talking to you, because last year has tried all of us, both you at home and us in the hospital. It is something that I never want to experience again, but I feel that we've come through this. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lee. I think it's wonderful that your whole unit, banded together and everybody rallied, and I think maybe we should send Katie a wedding present. I don't know. It's great. So thank you for that. Thank you for going first. Next up is Daniel Usumpov, who Daniel has been an anchor of our narrative medicine program for 4 years now. Hard to believe, and I'm sad to see him go at the end of this year, but I'm sure he won't be sad to go. So the title of his story is Labor and Medical Degree.
Okay.
You can up that.
I'm going to keep the mask on for to set the scene.
Okay.
It's, kinda it's a prop of sorts.
Okay.
Can everybody hear me? Yeah. All right. Labor and medical degree. Push! Come on! You can do a big push right here. Let's go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, relax for a second. Big deep breath right into the next one. Let's go. It was 5 a.m. when Tessa became 10 centimeters dilated and was ready to begin pushing. After 4 first trimester miscarriages, she was finally about to have a baby. Now, Tessa's labor course was not easy by any means. After 2 hours of pushing, her baby's head was just barely beginning to crown. And despite having an epidural placed, she was still in excruciating pain. She wanted to give up so many times, begging us for a C-section that we couldn't give her. We FaceTimed in friends and family, all of whom were cheering her on. Her partner, bedside, holding her hand, was giving her words of encouragement, although she was telling him to shut up fairly often and even jokingly threatened to punch him in the face a couple of times. But her partner was unflappable and stood by her side through it all. Eventually, time came around for a shift change. The morning team of residents, attendings, and nurses came to relieve the nighttime counterparts of their duty. I saw a classmate of mine peek their head through the door and gesture to me if I needed a sub, but I really wanted to see this through, no matter how tired I was. But Tessa, still pushing, saw all these people packing up and leaving, and this time she had enough. She refused to keep pushing and insisted that we give her this C-section, and as I looked around for somebody to convince her otherwise, I realized that it was up to me to do so. Tessa, you've worked so hard to get to this point. You can't give up now. You have to keep pushing. For whatever reason, Tessa responded to my voice. Some random medical student whose only purpose was really to hold up her leg and count to 10. But time and again, when another contraction came, no matter how hard she fought us, when I said, "All right, let's go," she would take in a deep breath and bear down with all her strength until I counted to 10 again. At one point, another medical student from the morning team tried taking over counting for me. And I was surprised when Tessa asked them that I continue doing the counting. I don't consider my voice particularly soothing, but I was happy to fill that role for my patient. Later that morning, in my tired stupor, I started to think about how going through medical school is a lot like giving birth sometimes. Now, hear me out. The day of my white coat ceremony marked day 1 of gestation. And in the beginning, you experience some growing pains, you're gonna gain some weight, we start losing some or a lot of sleep. Some people even may experience morning sickness, particularly during anatomy. But in all seriousness, though, medical school is one of the most difficult things I've ever had to go through. Every day is like another contraction, and I'm just counting down the seconds until the next one. Some days, I'm so exhausted from pushing that I just want to yell at the top of my lungs, I give up. I wish for some magical cesarean where somebody could cut me open and rip this medical degree from out of me. And the only thing that keeps me going are the people around me. Whether that's my family, reminding me how hard I've worked to get to this point, my friends and loved ones singing words of encouragement, or my mentors and faculty members reassuring me that everything's going to be okay. I need somebody, anybody to shout back at me, you have to keep pushing. Everyone in the delivery room breathed a huge sigh of relief when Tessa delivered a beautiful, healthy baby. Tessa was crying tears of joy at the sight of new life she brought into the world. Swarms of people were rushing into the room to check on the baby and on Tessa. And at this point, my exhaustion had caught up to me, and I disappeared into the crowd and escaped to my bed. Later, on my next shift, later that evening, I went back to check on Tessa and her family. And I was pleasantly surprised that they remembered who I was amongst all the people there that day. And Tessa looked up at me and said, "Thank you, Daniel, for not letting me give up on myself and for getting me to keep pushing." And as I stood there and I saw Tessa holding her baby, I flashed forward to a day when I could hold my medical degree in my hands and see the product of my difficult labor, and hopefully look back with fond memories. I know that I'm not going to come out of this unscathed, and I'll proudly sport the stretch marks of this hard-fought journey. But I won't forget anybody who's been there to support me, even if they were there just to hold my hand for a time and count me through the contractions. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. That was wonderful. I love your creativity, seeing medical school as a lot like giving birth. Gonna miss you when you're gone. Thank you for sharing that. Next up, we have a first-year medical student who has already gotten heavily involved in an narrative medicine program, Naya Williams.
The title of this piece is Clocks. Tick-tock, tick-tock, tick-tock. I still remember the wooden analog clock that hung in our family home. Its hands were constantly moving, swiping through time every second of the day. As a child, I'd stare in awe of the ways it displayed time and became time. Every day, when my mother returned from work, standing in front of that clock felt like my moment to show off my genius of recognizing what was obviously genius, what was obviously overlooked and underappreciated for all the ways it helped us through the day. But contrary to what my kindergarten teachers believed, I didn't leave the womb with this knowledge. My mama worked diligently to teach me the ins and outs of that clock, of the time I had, of the opportunity I'd been given in this life. Understanding the basics allowed me to appreciate the complicated, allowed me to recognize when the clock began to slow, when its arms would twitch with fatigue, when its luscious brown wooden skin seemed dusty and worn. It taught me that knowing to read a clock wasn't merely a gift or a privilege, but a necessity. It taught me that reading a clock was about memorizing its heartbeat. Tick-tock, 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 as much as it was about its flatline silence in need of new batteries. Only now that I'm older can I see the lesson hidden inside the nooks and crannies of my mother's words. Reading a clock is as basic and as important as reading ourselves. Respecting the gift of time is equivalent to respecting the gift of ourselves. When was the last time that you listened to the sound of your own heartbeat? Can you recognize it in a crowded room? Would you notice it if it skipped a beat, if your hands and your arms twitched with fatigue? Would you recognize the signs of your own battery running low? Or would it only become clear when your body finally stopped, when your mind finally stopped, when you finally stopped? I didn't. I couldn't. And for a long time, my arms only moved to help other people reach their goals and follow their dreams and exploit the riches that time freely offers. I was so constant for everyone else that I became the decorative fixture in their lives, quiet, unseen, almost non-existent, except for the precious time I seeded, I tended to, I kept alive. I kept time for them. I kept energy for them. They didn't know this, but I kept them. And it was only when my arms finally gave out and I was left depleted, I realized how many people only noticed me when I no longer beat in service to them. How often I was overlooked and underappreciated. How often they did not take the time to learn how to read me. How often they only grunted with frustration when my fatigue inconvenienced them. How often they exclaimed, how could we forget the batteries again? The love again, the food again, the care and concern again. How could we forget that damn clock again? But now, with all that I have in me, I stand tall, and I do so defiantly because in the time I spent in that one spot, not moving, I learned how much I really mean to me, with a ferocity that will live long past this moment that we are standing in. And now that I truly know my worth, my value, and all that I bring, I demand to be read with nothing less than fluency. Tick-tock, tick-tock, tick-tock. I still remember the wooden analog clock that hung in our family home. Its hands were constantly moving, swiping through time every second of the day. I stare in awe of the ways that it displayed time and became time. Now, I realize that all along, the true clock, the real face I was enamored with, was that of my own. Thank you.
The next up is, find my place here, is a first-year medical student. He's also a gifted writer and become very involved in our narrative medicine program. She also shares a story of personal fortitude. And Caitlin Rudisil. Her story is titled Stronger Than Steel.
Do I talk into this one?
You
Or?
just talk out to
Okay.
everybody. Talk to the world.
In the beginning, no one knew about the occasional cracks of bone paired with an ounce of pain. No one knew the vanishing cartilage and feeling of grinding bones. No one knew. And for the longest time, I tried to ignore all of this myself. But after so many months of limping, everyone knew. One night, I tossed and turned in excruciating pain. My tears made it difficult to see my phone as I typed a message to my grandfather. I can't take the pain. I hit my breaking point. As I explained the pain to my orthopedic surgeon, his smile transitioned into a tight horizontal line. The last 4 words I heard were bilateral hip replacement surgery. Sorry. When I went to get my grandfather in the waiting room, I tried to hide my tears. On the drive home, my thoughts whirling like a raging monsoon. What should I do? The surgeon told me to put off the surgery as long as I could, but the pain was unbearable. My teenage parents had my brother and me 13 months apart. My grandfather raised us. Instead of helping, my parents lived as if my brother and I never existed. My grandfather adopted my brother and me shortly after my diagnosis with systemic juvenile rheumatoid arthritis at 15 months old. Sorry.
Great. You're doing great. Take your time.
The adoption ensured that we could receive medical care through my grandfather's insurance, as my parents were unemployed. As I grew up, abandoned by my mother and my father a spotty appearance at best, I cherished every sacrifice my grandfather made for us. My diagnosis with SJRA presented challenges throughout my childhood and early adult life. I was no stranger to aching joints and roller coaster fevers. In fact, at age 10, my bed became my friend. Alternating doses of Motrin and Tylenol became my daily meals. My jaw stiffened to the point where putting a soup spoon in it felt like shoving a quarter into a nickel slot. My grandfather shuttled me to the bathroom on a chair because I could not walk. My immune system was at war with my joints, and my joints were losing. Unlike immune cells, cartilage does not regenerate. I maintained a jovial disposition thanks to my grandfather's unconditional love and support. I never welcomed pity, even from myself, at least not until this moment, with my orthopedic surgeon and this impossible decision, living with unbearable pain or replacing my hips at age 19. On the drive home from the hospital, my eyes welled with tears and I uttered to my grandpa, "Why me?" He offered me his wisdom. Take 24 hours to deal with the emotions, then tomorrow when you wake up, make a decision based on logic. A month later, cool air brushed my face on the short walk from the car to the hospital entrance. The hospital staff wheeled me into the surgical room. Shortly after, the countdown began. 10, 9, 8. I never made it past 7. I woke up to a strange sound. It sounded like a chainsaw, followed by the words, "She's awake." Within seconds, I dozed off again, and the next time I opened my eyes, my grandfather was there. I felt love and compassion, but most importantly, the sharp, gnawing pain that plagued me for too long was gone. In 2018, I had both hips replaced. Each time, I resembled a baby wobbling for the first time, just 6 hours after my surgeries. My eagerness did not stop there. I continually challenged myself. I wanted to come back stronger than before. I never imagined the amount of strength required to lift my leg following surgery. Similarly, the emotions I felt accomplishing this feat can only be described as elation. I will long remember the physicians, nurses, and other hospital workers who aided and supported me in my time of need. From holding my shaking hands as the epidural needle pierced my spine, to conversations about my career plans during recovery, and finally, to cheers and smiles at my annual checkups as I strutted down the aisle like a runway model. My recovery team listened so attentively as I spoke about my biochemistry courses, my love for hiking and lifting, and my aspirations to someday become a physician. I hope I never forget about this lesson, and as a doctor, see my patients fully, beyond their diagnosis, and provide comfort and support as well as excellent care. My grandfather brought me food, medicine, water, and even purchased 8-pound leg weights because he knew my love for weightlifting. My boyfriend, now fiance, offered immense support on our daily walks around my neighborhood, where he reminded me to take it easy as I tried to push up hills. Today, from hiking with my grandfather to lifting weights regularly to admiring the resilience of my body, I am grateful for all aspects of my life, and as I begin my medical school journey, I know that overcoming challenges of my life and the love that sustained me will carry me through the hardest times ahead.
I feel sympathy for all of you who have to cast a vote, and we're not even halfway through. It's going to be a very hard choice. Caitlin, thank you for that. I hope your grandfather is watching, and I hope we get to meet him one day. Next up is, I can't believe she's already an M3. She's also been involved in our narrative medicine program since the beginning. She was a winner, second place, I think, of our essay contest last year. Temple Health Wide, and next presenter with a story titled Our Song is Emily Hansen. Come on up, Emily.
She wanted classic rock playing when she died. That was the final wish of my patient, Janet, in room 4029, according to her son. I wouldn't mind it either, I suppose. I love classic rock too. In fact, on my way to the hospital that morning, I had taken the long-haul drive on I-76 at rush hour, listening to 102.9 WMGK, as I do most days. I had sung along to Supertramp's Breakfast in America, preparing myself for the day ahead. Windows down, radio up, always. I stood outside Janet's room with the other medical personnel, as her family sat at her bedside and sung quietly to her, consecrating her last moments of life to the tunes that she enjoyed. I was grateful I could not hear what song they were singing. I knew if I had, Janet would have taken it from me. I would never hear it the same way again. For the rest of my life, if I heard Janet's song on the radio, time would slow down for a moment. A deep pit would form in my stomach, and I would be reminded that she was here once, and I was with her. The song would remind me that I was one of the last to review the images of Janet's fatally herniated brain, to feel the lack of tone in her limbs, to look straight into her vacant eyes as I tried to stimulate her corneas with a saline flush one final time. The lyrics would take me back to the minutes right before Janet was extubated, as I put my hand on her foot and gave it a squeeze when no one was looking, mostly to comfort her, but partly to comfort myself. Although I don't have a melody to jog my memory, I imagine I will long recall the litany of prayers I recited for her in my head from the minute I entered her room, which continued well beyond her death. I didn't know if Janet ever prayed, but I was desperate to help her somehow. And the many invocations I committed to memory throughout my years of Catholic school were all I could give her in those moments. As I sat outside, I split my attention between the window to Janet's room and her vitals that I could see from the nurse's station, trying to remain stoic around the seasoned palliative care team. Her oxygen levels dropped first, all the way to 0. Then her heart gradually slowed like a metronome. With every cycle of the EKG, there was one fewer beat, like the coda of a song. After a few minutes, there were none. No guitar solo, no drumstick toss, no encore presentation. One last desperate beat, like one last clement chord, then silence. After Janet died, I finished seeing my other patients and took a particularly solemn walk to my car when the weight of her death began to hit me. She was my first patient to die, the first patient I would watch slip away from the painful earthly dwelling place that her body had become. She was my patient, and I wanted her to survive. Nonetheless, I was relieved to watch her go. I knew all worldly efforts had been exhausted, but I didn't want her to think that I gave up on her. I hope she knew I cared enough to be with her until the end. As I drove away from the hospital, I did something I rarely do. I called my mother. She answered in a panic, as my family members never call each other unless there's an emergency. I just needed to hear her voice. Janet was somebody's mother, and her son can only hear her now in his memories. I wonder if he will forget what she sounded like someday. I couldn't digest his mother's death without wondering how much longer I would have my own mother available at my fingertips. My mother's voice was the only song I wanted to hear emanating from my car speakers on that drive home, and I played it loudly for as long as I could. A few days later, I worked my last shift at the hospital where Janet died. I went to see another patient who now inhabited room 4029. Another woman lying ill in the same bed where Janet breathed her last. No music wafted out of the door, just the quiet hum of the ventilator and short beeps of the monitors, serenading someone else. Although Janet didn't steal a song from me, I imagine she will occupy a space in my memory for a long time. I'll remember her when the breeze hits my face the right way in traffic, and an oldie but a goodie meets my ears. As the exit signs fly by and the sun bounces off the cars around me, I'll crank up the volume a few more notches, just for her, so she'll know I'm listening. Maybe I'll take the long way home, once in a while, to let myself feel her again. Windows down, radio up, always. Thanks, everybody.
I can tell you this, that on the way home, my windows will be down and the volume will be up. And I love how you felt the need to call your own mother. I think that's just amazing and beautiful. Thanks for sharing that story. Next up, we have Eric Altnu, who is an infectious disease fellow, and he's new to Temple, and he reached out and wanted to participate in our slam, and let's give him a hearty, rousing welcome to Eric Altnu. His story is titled Checklist.
Thank you for having me. That actually takes the most courage as an ID fellow to take my mask off inside at this point. So, so again, my name's Eric Altnu. Before I was an ID fellow, I was a hospitalist for 2 years at Ohio State in Columbus, and it was around March, April 2020 that we were tasked with running our COVID wards, which was brand new for all of us. So. Our first surge at Ohio State was our prisoners. So we accept all prisoners from all over the state of Ohio. And we were the only hospital to do so in Ohio. And so COVID was new then. We had hundreds of patients coming in at one time. We didn't have many tools at our disposal. So the first suggestion for our patients was awake proning. Try to turn them over onto their stomach, try to get their lungs open, prevent intubation. And so we'd place orders in Epic, and the nurses would turn the patients over onto their stomach. But the problem was that the prisoners were chained with one leg to the bed. So one leg with the chain to the bed. So how could you turn the patient over? So I remember being on a Zoom call, as all meetings were then, and it was decided that the new protocol would be we'd chain their legs together. And then if we chained their legs together, we could then turn them over on their stomach. And so then we could awake prone them. So each morning on rounds, I would sort of try to make sure that everything was in order with the chains. So my mental checklist really started off as pretty simple. N95 mask, goggles, gown, gloves, chains, proning. And again, from room to room, it was the same. And, as things started to change, then the checklist became N95, goggles, gown, gloves, chains, hydroxychloroquine, which was short-lived. Then N95, goggles, gown, gloves, chains, steroids. N95, goggles, gowns, gloves, chains, steroids, plasma. N95, goggles, gowns, gloves, chains, steroids, plasma, remdesivir. As the weeks wore on, it felt like a lot of the same over and over, each patient room the same. Outside of the room, I got to know some of the guards that were taking care of the prisoners, but then soon those guards became patients as well, but they did not have chains. The National Guard flew in to help so that they could guard the prisoners, and there were these young, scared, barely 18-year-old men and women outside the rooms now, and I didn't recognize any of them, but even though I didn't know them, they would still greet me out the door, and I would start my same mental checklist, and it would be N95, goggles, gown, gloves, chains, steroids, plasma, remdesivir, tocilizumab. I remember one rapid in particular. My patient was getting sicker. I stepped outside of the room for the pulmonary fellow to intubate. Stepped out to prevent for aerosols. I ordered the propofol for sedation as I waited. And as they wheeled the patient out of the room to the ICU, I noted that they were putting the chains back on the leg, and that chain was being attached to the bed frame. They never forgot those chains. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Altnu. Some of these stories are almost unbelievable, isn't it? Just incredible. I'm sure that those memories will stay with you a long time. Thank you for coming and sharing. Next up, in our 8th position, is also another. We have such an abundance. It's great of first-year med students. And Carolina Ramos. And come on down, Carolina. Her story is actually a poem and called Sinceramente.
Sinceramente, I want to take a second and look around. All right, I know I'm not completely ready to share this, but there's a sliver of me that knows it will resonate with one of you. And sometimes there needs to be transparency in exchange for bravery. I can't believe I'm here. For many years, I waited patiently to recover. From what? It's sort of a mouthful. Anti-NMDA receptor encephalitis. What the hell is that? My brain was on fire, and at that time, I thought I was on my way to build my own empire. Who knew my mind and body would become unwired? As that last ray of sunshine disappeared, so did my grasp on reality. It began when I complained to my mom that I was forgetting my Spanish. She blamed anguish. No te preocupes, hija. Was it that far-fetched a notion? I was one exam away from graduation. It was later that evening, I began losing all my words. Feeling less and less like myself, I began to jot down what I experienced. All that was left of me was in my diary. It's time to stop being my mother's therapist. Was it food poisoning from my favorite New York City bagel shop? Are the walls so thin that the neighbors can hear the demon in my ear? And why is my right leg so numb? 3 surgeries, 2 procedures, 3 hospitals, and many months later, I spend time relearning daily tasks through occupational therapy. I knew that whatever was in store for me would allow me to be happy. At least that's what my parents kept telling me. It didn't feel like I was approaching happiness, especially with my newly acquired short-term memory. I relied on apps to keep track of what I did and pictures of what I cooked the day before. There was one day I forgot my iPad password, so the Apple team had to erase all my memories. I mean data. No sabía cómo vivir. Now, I want you to listen to my voice. What does it sound like to you? It didn't always sound like this. As you can see, look at me. I have this scar. I'm not talking about this one. I'm talking about this one. I would always ask, does my voice sound normal? Is it raspy? I hated my voice. More importantly, I did not recognize myself. I would hear myself in videos and forgot that deeper voice was me. Gee, what did I sound like before? I don't know anymore. It took a lot of time for me to feel okay about it. And that, within itself, is all right with me. And isn't that what life is about? Adapting? When I was about 2, it was when I learned to walk on my own 2 feet. And then again, when I was about 23, I had to relearn to walk on my own 2 feet. The non-slip terry cloths hospital socks weren't enough to keep me upright. Fue una lucha. Dancing hip-hop en vogue, ahora mi cuerpo me escucha. It was a merciless fight. I'm honestly amazed at how far my 2 feet and mind have taken me, and where they will continue to take me on my journey through life and medicine, where now patience is my virtue and patience are my reason. Sinceramente.
Thank you, Carolina. I love, what an intimate poem. And patience is my virtue and patience are my reason. I love that. Great ending. Thank you for sharing. Next up, in the 9th position, we have one of the iconic doctors here at Temple, who runs the palliative care program at Temple. And, what more can I say? Mary Kramer, Dr. Mary Kramer. Her story today is titled Badges of Courage. Thank you, Dr. Kramer.
I'm hitting my mark. I first have to acknowledge all the courage and talent in this room. I was not prepared. I thought I could do this without my glasses. I think I can. No, I have them. They're up there. So when you first asked me to do this, I thought, I think he asked me to do things and tell stories because I'm kind of like that farmer's insurance guy. When I walk through the hospital, I know a few things because I've seen a few things. And yes, I would say one of those things is definitely courage. I asked if I might dress up like the lion from The Wizard of Oz who lamented his lack of courage, only to find that it was there within him and his actions and the whole time, and in his actions the whole time. But it got me to wondering about this courage in all its different forms. The wizard told the lion that true courage is in facing danger when you are afraid. And I would agree, that kind of courage he and we have in plenty. But since it is a story slam, I will not pontificate on courage. What better way to tell you than through a story? And the story, just so we're all HIPAA compliant, is based on recall, the names, and the facts are blurred. So if you recognize the story, it's because you recognize this kind of story, but not the specifics. It's a story about what I find the scariest thing to do amongst all of healthcare. It's a story, we will say, about Jack and Diane. And Jack may have been a football star. He was, by all accounts, a great guy. Big heart, warm smile, high school sweetheart husband, fun, ready for anything dad. And the pictures on the side of his ICU room all told that story. The kind of larger-than-life person that seems unstoppable until he meets viral royalty. He got COVID, bad. And Diane becomes our first story of courage. Things were looking bleak, but she summoned her hope and her faith to advocate for her husband's life, and she had him transferred to our hospital from miles away on a Hail Mary pass. She had the courage to take a leap of faith and surrendered over her best friend to a care team in a hospital, one that she couldn't even visit for a short time, so that he could have a chance. And on the receiving end of that pass, courage point number 2, found in our ICU team. The courage to take on that chance, to push boundaries and pioneer into poorly charted territory. I am sure both parties were afraid, one bolstered by hope, the other by the adrenaline of the fight. Yet then the courage became quieter and closer. To be with those who are in pain and face uncertainty and sit with that takes a certain type of strength. To listen so closely that you hear their doubts slip out in a sigh. I'm exhausted. I'm confused. I wish they would be more clear. I wish this would end. To hear in those words a call to act, to seek out truth, to question those above you about what was exactly happening here, that takes courage. That is fear without the promise of hope or hormones to quiet it. The courage it takes to give Jack a haircut and a shave, care that was intimate and so close. You had to feel him as a person, not a patient, just a guy who cared about looking good. And when the truth was finally found, it was a hard truth because we could not save Jack. And those who went in to meet Diane and tell her, now certainly that is courage. Bound by duty, but still dosed heavily with fear. Diane revealed her own plot twist, as if to remind us that we did not own this story. She already knew. She had sensed that. And somehow she was able to push through this meeting and leave us all in the dust, gasping, gaping mouths, because despite her profound impending loss, she met us with a laser focus, asking about just how we were going to make this right with his children. Her courage, bound by maternal instinct. My God, she was brave, planning for his life's end. And finally, those that stayed even closer to guide goodbyes and bear witness to grief, raw and unscripted. That is some hard stuff. Children, sister, wife, and partner in life since high school. His son wanted to know if we had more snacks. His daughter drew pictures and tried as best as she could to snuggle onto the hospital bed that was full of equipment. And his wife would stay until he took his last breath. And she also told us our tissues were crap. Unscripted. All this courage, so many badges along the way. The courage to dream and dare that's mixed with hope, the courage to surrender, the courage to take chances and push boundaries, the courage to be with those who face uncertain futures, the courage to seek the truth, the courage to speak the truth. And yes, what I find scariest, the courage to embrace grief. For a flash, I push against every fiber of my being that tells me to head another direction or look another way. But something forces me to put foot in front of foot. To face those who are in the midst of an emotional natural disaster, actively grieving, and make yourself vulnerable to that experience, knowing it will shape you and bend you and twist you into someone who may get broken. It's a fear that is real, and it is one I cannot shake, especially after the past 18 months. And yet, my heart swells when I come back the next day after it's all over and all my colleagues come back too, ready to face whatever story will come next and be scared all over again and embrace it all over again. That's some courage.
Thank you, Dr. Kramer, for sharing that story of courage. Thank you for caring so deeply and having the courage to risk getting, what did you say, bent, twisted, and broken. And that goes for all the people across the street who give so much of themselves. Thanks for sharing that. Next up, 10th in our lineup, is a second-year medical student. And his story is titled, I hope I don't, Pamelia, am I saying that right? Mark Cipriazzo will share his personal story. Pamelia, there you go.
Hi, my name is John Marco Cipriazzo. I like to go by Mark. I am a Filipino American. My parents met in medical school in the Philippines, then completed physical medicine and rehabilitation residencies right here in Philadelphia, where I was born.
Back up a step.
Oh,
You
yeah.
can see yourself. There you go.
My mom is a physiatrist. My dad was a physiatrist. He had a stroke, lived in a wheelchair for 4 years, then died when I was 15. He inspired me to pursue medicine. In the Philippines, there is nothing more important than your pamilya. Everyone plays a big role. Your titos, your titas, your lolos, your lolas, your pinsans, and your pamangkins. My mom is the second youngest in a family of 9 siblings. Growing up, I would visit the Philippines, but most of what I knew about all my titos and titas came from stories that my mom would tell us, what they were like growing up and how they helped her become a physician. Before I started medical school, I thought that death couldn't faze me anymore. I figured that I had mastered the art of getting through it. I appeared strong at my father's wake and his funeral. I had to be tough for my mom and my 2 younger brothers. But this year exploded that idea. Maybe it was the constant worry over COVID-19, the endless headlines about America's politics and division, or the lonely struggle completing the first year of medical school, mostly on the computer. Something in me broke. In the middle of the neurology block, I found myself in a small room in the library, completely distraught, swiping through old pictures of my dad. Hearing a lecture about strokes had pushed me over the edge. I could barely see my screen through my tears. All I thought about for weeks were the exact mechanisms of his stroke, how it eventually killed him. And I wondered, how would I ever care for people going through the same thing when I can't even process my own father's illness and death? Before I continue, I just want to say that with help from a therapist, and after passing an OSCE with a stroke patient in it, I'm okay now. In March, my tita Ledi, who is my mom's oldest sister, died. And just a few months ago, my tito Jimmy, another of my mom's older brothers, also died. In our family, my mom is the only doctor. Even living halfway across the world, she is the point person for all things health-related. What my mom does for the family is noble and inspiring, but it also sounds impossible. Knowing exactly what mechanisms are causing your role models and loved ones to deteriorate. Trying everything you can to get your family to take better care of themselves and listen to your advice, because you know of the consequences if they don't. Feeling the weight of the world when you know the inevitable before everyone else does. I cannot even begin to imagine the levels of stress when it comes to making medical decisions for people that have shaped who you are. Being the one to inform the rest of the family when things look bleak. Mourning your loved ones, but trying to keep a stoic countenance. Coming to terms with the pathophysiology of my dad's death and watching my mom navigate these 2 recent deaths in our family have opened my eyes to the inevitable struggles that come with gaining medical knowledge. These days, I'm feeling more ready to take care of patients and even stroke patients, but I am wholly unsure of filling the role as a family's go-to expert. One more thing gives me pause about becoming a doctor. I'm eternally grateful for the opportunity to grow up in America, and I look forward to taking all of the blessings that I've been given and paying them forward and serving others. But at the same time, I cannot help but notice what being the child of an immigrant truly means in this country. I have long suffered little indignities, kids in elementary school making fun of what I eat for lunch or the way I eat it, the man who gave me my driving test asking how can an Asian kid have the name John? My college roommate saying, of course, all Asians are good at music, everyone knows that. And the recent surge in anti-Asian hate and violence made my otherness more apparent than ever. For weeks, I feared that a random person on the street would attack me just because of what I looked like. Even though I was born right here in Philadelphia, I will always be Filipino American, never just American. But there is also a sense of empowerment in that. After this tumultuous year, I figured out that being Filipino American is about using religion, food, and language to still feel connected to the people that you love, even when they are a world away. It's about balancing the connection to your family with assimilation into a new culture. It's about the defense mechanisms you need to learn to feel like you're really part of the American experience. It's hard to truly feel ready to tackle the world of medicine in a country where you don't fully feel welcome, but I continue to push. I push for my dad. I push for my Tita Letty. I push for my Tito Jimmy. All the people who have helped lead me to where I am today. I push so that Filipino Americans will have a physician who understands the struggle they go through. I push so that people know that I truly belong in this country and I'm ready to contribute. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that story, Mark. So many things about that story grabbed me. I love how you're increasingly ready to become a doctor and care for the patients, but it's your family that worries you. That is a big, can't imagine what that burden is like. Thanks for sharing that. 11th, coming up here is an ACMS postback, Brooke Stanicki. And, I'm so glad the postbacks are here, represent. And her story is titled, Hoping for a Car Crash.
On my first day as an EMT, I showed up to my shift 45 minutes early, just in case there was traffic, even though the station was 2 minutes from my house. I wore my oversized BDU pants, the ones with 8 unnecessary pockets, hiked up past my belly button, so high that I kind of waddled when I walked. After doing an equipment check at the ambulance, and then neurotically rechecking everything, just in case, I sat on a plastic chair outside the station with my partner and my preceptor. And I looked up at the stars in a beautiful night sky, crossed my fingers, and hoped for a car crash. Or a fire, lightning strike, rowboat accident, sudden onset hurricane. I didn't really care. I just wanted a disaster. I wanted the chance to be a hero. I was a teenager, fresh out of EMT school, high off all the random facts I knew about tourniquets and defibrillators and respiratory distress. I read the textbook till the pages wore. I could name the chapters in order. I thought I was ready. A few days later, I got my wish, a car crash, the chance to be a hero. But the textbook didn't tell me what to tell my patient, a pregnant mother, when she asked if her baby would be okay. The ambulance didn't have an ultrasound, and I was barely qualified to be giving her a Band-Aid, much less an exam of her unborn child. But I did what I could. I wrapped her wounds, I checked her blood pressure, and when she asked if she could hold my hand, I gave it to her. Her blood pressure and pulse improved as she squeezed my gloved fingers. After we cleared the hospital, my preceptor chewed me out in the ambulance bay. "Do you have the stones to do this job?" he asked in his thick New Jersey accent. He said I got too emotionally involved. I nodded, but thought, what else was I supposed to do? A few weeks later, another car crash. This patient had rolled his pickup truck into a ditch on the side of a highway. I'll never forget smelling the air on the highway shoulder. It was acrid, like gasoline and garbage. My partner and I went to the patient, fit him with a cervical collar, placed him onto a backboard, and brought him into the ambulance. The paramedics put him on the monitor and cut off his clothes. I touched one of his toes and asked if he could feel it. He responded, "Are you doing it yet?" It was then we realized he couldn't feel anything from the waist down. The patient started to absolutely panic. The medics desperately tried to calm him down long enough for them to get an IV. And suddenly, through all of this chaos, the patient's phone rang. It was one of those custom ringtones, the ones you set for someone special. The chorus to Iris by the Goo Goo Dolls. I'll never forget the moment he heard it. How sad his eyes looked, because he knew exactly who was on the other line. And I also realized that maybe the only thing worse than being in a life-altering car accident is telling the person you love what happened, changing their life too. Over the past 5 years, I've seen thousands of patients. I've bore witness to true tragedy, to devastating loss, to triumphant success, to incredible miracles I could never describe. But I don't think I've ever saved the day. Most of the times, by the time you call 911, the day is beyond saving. My job was never to swoop in and be the hero. It was to be present, to swallow my doubts, to be effective, to have quiet, understated courage in the moments that really mattered. Standing before you today, I have found peace and identity in the chaos of medical emergencies. But I don't wish for car crashes anymore. I hope that every time the tones go off and we get another call, it's because someone slipped in the shower and they just need a hand getting up. I hope they butt dialed 911, and when we show up at their door, they look confused and they tell us that everyone's fine. This past summer, I watched as my cadet sat on the plastic chairs outside the station in her brand new BDU pants, hiked up way past her belly button. I saw how she tapped her foot on the ground, unable to control all of the energy, all of this jittery feeling from the knowledge she thought she knew. I saw her look up at the stars in a beautiful night sky. And I didn't say anything. Her place in all of this is just something she will learn. Thank you.
Thank you, Brooke. What a powerful story. You guys, we have one to go. We have 11 down and one to go, and our last one is going to be brought to you by the miracle of Zoom from St. Luke's in Bethlehem, represent as well. So we have Julia Grace Leap Lazar, who's going to present a story titled That Little Voice. After Julia shares her story. We're going to come back and we'll tally the votes and declare a winner. Okay, take it away, Julia.
Hi, this one's got that little voice. Courageous is a word that has rarely been used to describe me. I tend to be afraid of most things. Jellyfish are at the top of my list, followed by heights, watching improv shows, and talking to strangers on the phone. When I was younger, I even used to give the basketball to the other team because I was so afraid I would injure my smaller opponents by accident. And despite my size and my strength, I still hid from other kids on the playground because I was afraid they would poke fun at all of my insecurities. If I didn't try to join in, I couldn't be left out. If I never asked, I wouldn't be disappointed if the answer was no. Somewhere along the way, I found my voice, though. I had friends who loved me, family who supported me, teachers and mentors who invested in me and stayed by my side through the highs and lows of life. Each of these people taught me something new about myself, how to embrace my strength and love the things that make me different, that pleasing everyone around you should not be your purpose in life, that I am smart enough, strong enough, and brave enough to do so many of the things I thought were out of my reach. I used to be scared to say I wanted to be a doctor because I was afraid it would never happen. I was afraid to submit my applications to medical school because I knew there would be rejections along the way. I would never have made it to where I am now without the words of comfort, gentle hugs, and endless late night conversations of these people in my life. So I was surprised to find myself transformed back into this shy little kid who couldn't stand up for herself as I tried to please my attending during my first rotation of third year. Early weekend, just starting to interact with real patients for the first time. The attending hands me a patient's file that's nearly an inch thick, tells me to go through it, interview the patient, and she's going to finish writing her note. I do my best trying to recall everything I've learned in the past 2 years of doctoring, go back to the attending, relay the information, and then she starts. Did you ask her about any previous colonoscopies? The attending asks. No, I replied slowly, knowing that I should have. Do you think that would be something important for a patient scheduling a colonoscopy? She retorted pretty sharply. And I nodded, thinking to myself, okay, well, now I think that would be important. But it didn't end there. The grilling continued for another minute or two, but it felt like hours. Her saying, did you ask about ... Me replying no, her replying with, well, don't you think that would be an important thing to ask about? And me just nodding and avoiding eye contact. And it just kept going all day. Another patient, another back and forth, more shame, more embarrassment. And after a few hours, I just broke. Tears streaming down my face, trying to catch my breath. She took me aside, gave me some tissues, and I tried to calm down. She told me to just take a minute to pull myself together, that she was only being hard on me because she cared, that I needed to be able to control my emotions, stand up for myself. And then she said, no one is going to take you seriously if you're talking in that little baby voice. She imitated my high-pitched tone of my voice that kind of comes out when I'm feeling anxious. And my face just burned in embarrassment, flushed bright pink. When I left that day, I felt weak and defeated. And several years ago, I would have just left it at that, letting this experience hang over me like a black cloud, a voice of doubt always in the back of my head telling me that I was too sensitive, too emotional, unworthy, and incapable of becoming a doctor. But instead, I let in the people who matter most to me. I talked with my classmates who reminded me that my empathy is a strength, not a weakness. I texted my friends from home who reiterated that I am good enough to be in medical school and that I will be an amazing doctor one day. And I talked to my sister, who told me, Julia, you are so much more than what she can see in you, so don't let her get in your head. I let that all sink in over the next few days, and with the help of my friends, family, and classmates, I managed to find my voice again. At the end of the week, I asked if I could speak with the attending in private, took a deep breath, and told her that some of the things she had said to me that day were not okay. Making fun of someone's voice and belittling them is not a helpful teaching strategy. Telling someone to control their emotions will never end well. Trust me, I've tried. I know I have a lot to learn, I told her, but her manner of teaching was anything but helpful. And she seemed surprised that I actually came out and said these things. She said she was sorry, that it had been a stressful day with complicated patients, that she just wanted to help me. She did help me, but likely not in the way she intended. The experience, painful as it was, showed me how courageous I could be when I didn't feel so alone. How to stand up for myself and the people who will come after me in this rotation, using a type of courage that doesn't just come from within ourselves, but can also come from the people around us, the ones who support us and tell us to believe in ourselves. They are the little voices in our heads that give us courage when we need it most. We hope to remember this lesson and pass on this courage to the next person I find who needs to hear. You are worthy, you can do it, even if it makes you scared. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia. Thank you all. 12 amazing stories, one more amazing than the next. So I think what we should do is, I just think we should give a round of applause to everybody, first of all. Again, one more time. There's a lot of courage and caring hearts in this room. So we're going to do something we've never done before. We're going to try to have this hybrid vote. Here in the room, you all will be given an index card, and you vote, if you liked number 4, put number 4 on your card. You get to pick one winner. Pick the number of the person 1 through 12 that you liked, and we'll be passing the cards out and collecting them. For all of you at home in Zoom land, you're going to get 2 polls, 6 and 6. So you get to pick one winner also. So for on the poll that you don't want, you pick none of the above, and on the poll that you do want, pick the winner. You have to respond to both polls. You'll figure it out when you look at it. So mark none of the above on one and pick the one you want on the other, and we are going to tabulate. But I do want to say one last thing as you all are voting, and that is that truly everyone here is a winner. All 12 of you for sharing are incredibly brave, and we're grateful. So stay tuned as the accounting firm here tabulates the votes. Everybody got votes. It was very close, and everybody really should feel like a winner here. I'm gonna drum roll. In third place, gotta get this right. In third place was number 8, Carolina Ramos. All right. And her story, Sinceramente. This is a combination of people voting at home, obviously, and people voting here. Carolina, come on down. I have to say that in all the haste, I neglected to actually pick up the prizes, which are going to be $25 gift certificates to Starbucks. They'll be coming, so thank you. Wait, take this off. Put this on. I just want to, shake her hand. Thank you very much. Stay here. All right. Here, go take a nod on Zoom there. Okay, so there you go. All right. All right. Gotta satisfy the audience here. Second place, representing the Postbacks, Brooke Stanicky. All right. I should tell the doctors in the room that the students always win. Just so you know that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Go take a bow in front of the Zoom audience there. There you go. All right. Thank you so much. All right, and our winner tonight, first year medical student for clocks, Naya Williams. All right. Thank you so much. Thank you. Take a bow in front of the Zoom audience there. Are you good? And, all right, everybody's down, and we get a photo of all the storytellers, assuming you're all still here. And I think that's it. Thank you, everybody, for another successful night.